If you've ever dealt with unfair power, neighbors drunk on control, or people who think their rules are above reason, you need to hear this story. It's about how one family stood their ground against a powerful homeowners association, got dragged through hell, and walked out stronger than ever. Stick with me till the end, and if you believe in standing up to injustice no matter how big the enemy, hit that subscribe button because this story will remind you why truth always wins, even when it feels impossible. When I first bought the land at the edge of Maple Ridge Estates, I thought I was buying peace. The kind of peace that comes with open fields, the sound of wind brushing through trees, and sunsets that painted the sky in amber. It wasn't supposed to be complicated. The lot was slightly outside the HOA zone. I'd confirmed it twice with the county clerk and once with the real estate lawyer. I wanted to build my dream home, something simple, self-designed, with glass walls overlooking the valley. For years, I'd saved for that. But peace is expensive when pride lives next door. It started small. A letter in my mailbox, typed in formal tone, notice of architectural non-compliance. At first, I laughed. The letterhead read, Maple Ridge HOA, and I wasn't even under their jurisdiction. I walked the 400 feet to the HOA president's house, a pale blue colonial sitting like a judge on a hill, and politely explained that my land was outside their boundary line. She smiled, tight, condescending, and said, well, it still affects our view, Mr. Carter. We'll see about that. That was the beginning of a nightmare that would last almost 2 years, cost me nearly everything, and still, in the end, prove something that no law book could teach. Arrogance has a price, and justice has patience. Within weeks, the HOA board had filed an injunction, claiming my home's elevated construction obstructed the scenic line that enhanced community property values. I couldn't believe it. They literally claimed I was blocking their sunsets. My contractor was forced to stop. The foundation was half poured, my savings tied up in permits and materials. The stress seeped into my bones. My wife, Sarah, tried to stay calm, but I could see the tension in her smile. Every morning, she'd make coffee and stare at the half-built frame, whispering, we'll get through this. But lawsuits don't care about whispers. The HOA had money. They were backed by homeowners who saw my modern home as an intruder, something that didn't fit their red brick aesthetic. And their lawyer, a man named Harold Green, had a reputation for burying opponents in paperwork. For months, I was served document after document. Notices, requests, affidavits, each one thicker than the last. My lawyer, an old friend from college named Marcus, kept saying, they're bluffing. You're outside their zone. But bluffing doesn't stop when pride is at stake. The case made local news. Homeowner defies HOA construction limits. They painted me like some rebellious developer instead of a man just trying to build a home. I lost sleep, I lost weight, and I started to lose hope. The turning point came when Sarah found an old zoning map in the county archives. It was dated before Maple Ridge had expanded, showing the exact border line. My property, all 2.3 acres, sat clearly outside the HOA limits. Marcus's eyes lit up when he saw it. This is it, he said. They've been enforcing imaginary boundaries. We filed a counterclaim for harassment and unlawful interference with private property. That's when things got ugly. HOA members started parking their cars near our lot, taking photos, posting online that our home was illegal. They mailed us anonymous letters. One even said, you'll regret fighting us. Sarah cried that night. I held her hand and said, let them try. Months turned into a year. The construction site stood silent, a skeleton against the skyline. Every delay cost us storage fees for materials, interest on the construction loan, emotional toll on our marriage. Sometimes I'd drive up there alone and sit in my truck, staring at the empty frame, feeling like I'd failed my own dream. But then came the trial. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. Fluorescent lights, wooden benches, and a judge who looked like she'd seen too many of these cases. The HOA lawyer started with his usual pomp, waving documents, citing bylaws. He said, Your Honor, the defendant's property disrupts the aesthetic balance of our community. I'll never forget how the judge looked up from her papers and said, aesthetic balance. Is that a legal term now? There was a ripple of laughter, even from the clerks. Green tried to recover, showing aerial photos and claiming my home blocked the communal view. The judge raised an eyebrow. Are you saying this man's private property obstructs your client's enjoyment of the sky? He sputtered something about visual harmony. That's when Marcus stood, calm, steady, with that old spark I'd missed. He presented the zoning map, the one from the archives. Your Honor, this is a certified document from the county office. It clearly shows the HOA boundary line ending here. He pointed to the map. Mr. Carter's property lies entirely outside this line. The HOA has no jurisdiction, no authority, and no right to interfere. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Green, did your clients know about this? Green hesitated. We had reason to believe the map was outdated. Outdated. The judge's voice hardened. Because it doesn't suit your claim. She shook her head, chuckling softly. I think I've heard enough. What happened next felt like breathing after years underwater. The judge dismissed the HOA's case with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile, and granted us damages for legal fees and construction delays. Then, in a tone half amused, half stern, she said, I've seen a lot of frivolous cases, but suing a man for blocking a sunset takes the cake. The courtroom laughed. Even I smiled for the first time in months. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks later, an anonymous envelope arrived at our house. Inside, a letter of apology signed by 3 HOA members. They admitted they hadn't agreed with the lawsuit but were pressured by the president, Mrs. Langford, who feared property devaluation. Ironically, when word spread that the HOA had lost, local news ran a follow-up piece titled, Judge to HOA, You Can't Sue the Sun. Property values in the area actually rose because people admired how I'd stood my ground. When construction resumed, neighbors who once glared at us waved instead. Even Green, the lawyer who'd mocked me in court, sent a short note saying, no hard feelings. You proved your point. Sarah and I finally moved in 6 months later. The first night, we stood on our balcony, watching the sunset over the valley, the same view they'd tried to say we didn't deserve. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, worth it. I smiled. Every second. Still, some scars stayed. For a while, I jumped at the sound of certified mail or unexpected knocks. But I learned something through that ordeal, that rules without reason are tyranny, and silence in the face of bullies only feeds them. The HOA disbanded a year later, after new leadership took over and rewrote the bylaws to limit their power. They even invited me to speak at a community meeting about constructive conflict resolution. I went. Not out of pride, but closure. When I stood at the podium, I said, I don't hate any of you. I just wanted to live in peace. But peace isn't granted by committees. It's earned by truth. The room was silent. Even Mrs. Langford, who had started it all, looked down, her once perfect posture softened by defeat. As I walked out, I passed the same hill where her house stood. She was in the yard, trimming roses. For a moment, our eyes met. She gave a small nod. Not quite apology, not quite acceptance, but acknowledgement. And that was enough. Years later, when I look back, I realized that the lawsuit was never just about property lines. It was about control, about how easily humans mistake control for order. They built fences around their world and called it safety. I just refused to live inside one. Sometimes, I still get messages from people who read the news story or see the video recap someone made online. They ask, how did you stay calm? The truth is, I didn't. I broke down, doubted myself, almost gave up. But Sarah kept me grounded. And deep down, I knew that no one has the right to take away your dream just because it blocks their view of comfort. Now, every morning, when the light floods our kitchen through those glass walls, I remember the judge's laugh. Not cruel, but freeing, as if justice itself found the whole thing absurd. It reminds me that sometimes the fight isn't about winning or losing, it's about refusing to be bullied into silence. And if there's one thing I'd tell anyone facing a battle like mine, it's this: stand your ground, even when they call you stubborn. Because one day, when the dust settles and the sun sets where it always has, you'll realize, they never owned the view.